or expensive to accomplish. But in a very real sense, it will not be one man going to the moon. It will be an entire nation.
For untold centuries, man had looked outward into the heavens. Now, for the first time, returning astronauts could look inward toward the small planet that was home to the wayward and contentious creature called man. Threatened now by nuclear apocalypse, it seemed inexpressibly valuable. Hanging in the darkness of space, it shone bright as springtime, pretty as an apple on a tree.
Seven-tenths of our world is covered with water. In Los Angeles, there's a place that overlooks this vast frontier. A place of wilderness. A place of drama. Hold your breath. It's Marineland. Plummet into global oceans teeming with life. Go eye to glowing eye with predators of the deep. Venture into a realm as intriguing as outer space. All a touch closer at LA's own Marineland.
CNR had low prices.
Would you believe? Mine is 30% polyester. His is pure silk.
Sure, I believe you. You never lied to me before.
CNR. Now we're name dropping.
I just called to say I love you.
At Sprint, we're in the business of bringing people together for less. And when it comes to people like fathers and daughters,
I just don't fit in.
we think that's a pretty important business to be in.
We won!
You're right, we won.
So call.
Here comes the car that has outsold every car in the world 4 years running. You probably know what it is. It's Ford Escort. Ford Escort.
For the next 2 weeks, we want Escort to be the best-selling car in town. Of course, with 6.9% financing, it won't be hard. Today, the world. Tomorrow, Southern California.
In the summer and early fall of 1962, as signs of increased Soviet military activity in Cuba continued to mount, President Kennedy, on more than one occasion, publicly as well as privately, warned the Soviets that there were limits to Soviet military activity in the Caribbean that the United States could tolerate. When he called me in on one morning in mid-October to tell me that our overflights of Cuba had in fact identified Soviet missile camps on that island, he was determined not to let it go by. He felt that this was a challenge from which the United States could not back down.
Well, I think there was some initial skepticism about the existence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. These damned aerial photographs meant a lot to the decoders of the photographs, but they didn't mean much to anyone else. To the lay eye, you didn't know what they proved.
But when we then got the air photos of the duplication in Cuba of the exact kind of missile site which we were familiar with in the Soviet Union, then we could watch the construction of these missile sites on almost an hourly basis, from empty pastures to a missile site. Then we knew we had a real crisis on our hands. Immediately, on October 16, Kennedy formed a top-secret group to devise a response to the threat rising in Cuba. Called the ExComm, or Executive Committee of the National Security Council, this small assembly of civilian and military advisors would meet almost continuously for the next 13 days. To avoid national alarm, the president maintained his usual schedule, resolved to avoid any public statements or news leaks until a course of action had been determined.
As the ex-com considered alternative steps, Kennedy received a previously scheduled visit from Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko. Again, the minister repeated Soviet disavowals of any aggressive preparations in Cuba, unaware that the president had clear photographic evidence in his desk. While the armed services rapidly prepared for the worst, the ex-com debate continued. Some advisors urged an immediate airstrike, an invasion of Cuba. Others recommended a more gradual application of force, beginning with a blockade of the island, thus avoiding a premature commitment to all-out war. Not until Saturday, October 20, did the president receive word in Chicago that the ex-com was ready to offer opposing recommendations. Returning, Kennedy next day heard the proposals. Dean Rusk remembers.
Well, we knew that this crisis had to be resolved rather quickly, or it would become a different ballgame. Because we never saw a warhead on a missile on a launcher ready to fire in Cuba. We wanted to get this crisis resolved before that situation occurred.
Kennedy decided on the more cautious strategy of blockade or quarantine, simultaneously placing heavier forces into position if invasion became necessary and war with the Soviet Union loomed. While enlisting the support of other European and American nations, the administration moved armored forces into Florida and the Southeast. A growing fleet spread into the Caribbean. B-52 bombers were dispersed and some kept continuously airborne. On Monday evening, 7 days after the beginning of the crisis, the president made his first report to the nation.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The quarantine of Cuba began at 10 o'clock on the morning of Wednesday, October 24. Its perimeter first had been set at 800 miles, but then reduced to 500 to permit Khrushchev more time to consider the dangers of confrontation. Amid rising tension in the White House, the first Russian ships approached the quarantine barrier. Then, at 10:32 a.m., came word that several ships had halted, or actually were turning. But the relaxation was short-lived. Quickly came further reports of Soviet submarines entering the area, and a feverish speed-up of efforts to assemble bombers and missile installations in Cuba. Each indicated an attempt at a deceptive standoff in which the Soviets could use the time to its advantage. Again, the hours ticked away. Other nations were viewing the crisis with increasing alarm. At the United Nations, UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronted Soviet Representative Zorin.
Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no?
You will have your answer in